Hey everyone, and welcome to a brand new video. Tonight we have 10 twisted horror stories. As always, if you do enjoy this video, please be sure to drop a like rating as it helps out immensely. Subscribing if you are new is also very much appreciated, as I post videos just like this all of the time. Really quick, my other channel is getting really close to 5,000 subscribers, so if you want to hear even more horror stories, I will have it linked in the pinned comment as well as the top link in the description. The channel is called Miss Terra, Missterra. And also, really quick, I gotta put out a content warning for this video because some of the stories in this video are pretty messed up, a little bit further than I usually go on this channel, especially the last two stories, so heads up for that. Anyway, enjoy the video. Please be sure to check out the other channel if you are interested. And as always, I hope you all have a great night. What triggers the extraordinary? What are the ingredients for it to strike at a specific moment or place? What are the requirements for it to strike in someone's life? These are only three among the many questions I ask myself every day while remaining unable to answer to at least one. Perhaps you will help me after you read my story. A decisive, extraordinary event. My name is Stephanie V. The story you are reading happened 8 years ago in December of 2013. I was still living with my mother back then and managed to secure a position as a rookie 911 dispatcher. Only a few weeks after I started, on that particular day, I arrived at work and started my 12-hour shift at exactly 8 a.m. It was one of those days I like to call tsunami days, because it starts so soft and smooth before hell is suddenly let loose and total chaos just ravages everything. I received a amount of calls until it was 7:46 p.m. This will be the last, I thought, unaware of how significant the memorable that call and that day overall would be. 911, what is your emergency? I said. I've been stabbed. I'm bleeding. The lady painfully said on the other line. I shivered at the quick realization that the situation was highly tense, and it was my first time handling that type of emergency. What position are you in? Are you sitting or lying down? I instinctively questioned. Lying down on the floor, she answered. All right, madam. Can you apply pressure on... I'm all ready, she said. Okay, all right, madam. I would like you to calm down and tell me where exactly you are, I said, not knowing at that moment if I was handling the situation the right way. In an alley between Davis and Colbert Street. I'm dying, she replied with a voice that sounded very familiar to me. You'll not, madam. Help is on the way. We know exactly where you are, I said, hoping it would give her hope and enough strength to fight for her life. I understood we were both in the same town. The alley she mentioned is not so far from where I stayed, and my mother and I often took it to go and come back from work. What is your name? I asked, after dispatching the police and an ambulance to the location. At that point, I started shaking because I was very afraid to hear her die before even being rescued. Please, can you please send help at my place? The farmer, I think he knows my address and went to my house. He's gonna kill my mom, the lady revealed. Things were getting worse. I could not just ignore that specific detail because she could be very right. I guess that she referred to her aggressor as the farmer, but I wondered why. What is your address? I asked, ready to do the needful to prevent another attack. 136 Swift Lane Street, she replied. I remained silent for seconds, just hearing her breathing after she just mentioned my address. I looked at the caller number and my heart almost exploded when I recognized my own cell phone number displayed on the screen. I took out my phone and of course there was no ongoing call or any specific activity. No, this had to be some traditional sick joke engineered by my colleagues to terrorize the new hires for sure. Or a serious system bug, I thought. Are you there? The lady asked, now crying. Yes, sweetie, I'm here, I said after collecting myself. Are you sure 136 Swift Lane Street is the correct address? Yes, it's almost 9 and my mom's already back for work. If the farmer gets there, he will stab her with the sickle, like he did to me, she revealed. It was almost 8 p.m., not 9 p.m. I put it on the shock and her situation, maybe. I tried to find any way that could help me clear the air concerning the address to send help at the appropriate location. A few seconds later, I thought that identifying her mother and directly contacting her would further help to get her to safety. What is your mom's name? I asked, hoping that she has her records in our system somehow. Melanie V, she said, mentioning my own mother's name. Look, if this is some kind of joke, it's really not funny, okay? What? She asked, surprised. What's your name? I questioned, upset and ready to put an end to this joke. My name? She answered back, filling my veins with ice and my heart with fear at the realization that her voice sounded very familiar simply because I was listening to my own voice in a dire situation, but I could not bring myself to just believe it. I had to hear it. I'm Stefan. Oh no, he's coming back, he's going to kill me. No, please no. Several chop sounds followed, again and again. Sounds of flesh hit with an object. The gurgling sounds of her mouth filled with her blood were enough to make me jump, remove my headset and walk backwards. I stared at my desk, hyperventilating, trying to piece together how I just heard myself die. All my colleagues helped me calm down. I explained everything to them. However, I did not want to hear anything coming from them as I was certain that they had a hand in the matter. They all denied. Some suggested hackers. Others did not shy away from mentioning the supernatural. I called my mother and asked her to come fetch me right after the end of her service in a supermarket. When she arrived, we also discussed what just happened, and while she comforted me, it was reported to us that I had dispatched the police and an ambulance to a place where there was no trace of violence or murder, as if what I heard never existed. My number was indeed displayed as the caller number, but in my own cell phone call logs there was no trace of a 911 call, further making the whole incident dubious and strange. To top it all, for some reason, no record of the call was available. My supervisor said that investigation would follow, and I was given a 3-day rest that did not really sit well with me. Some of them suspected me. I was very aware of that. However, I know that I did not invent it at all. It really happened. I sat at the back and right side of my mom's car ready to be taken home. I had finished my shift anyway. Cars, festive decorations, lights, and the sky were among the few things I contemplated on my way to home. Oh my mother said, unable to finish her exclamation. I looked at my mother while she looked at something on her left. I moved from the right side to the left side of the car to see what prompted her reaction, only to be introduced to a pure vision of horror. There he was, standing in the alley between Davis and Colbert Streets. A black jacket on top of a grayish bib overall and a red shirt. He stared right back at us with his sickle in his left hand, his feet somehow deep in the snow. His face pale under his black hat that made his eyes glow in the dark like those of a cat. We looked at him as my mother completely forgot about the road until he was completely out of view. She decided to take me to my aunt and call the police on the way. She avoided describing him exactly like he was to avoid being ridiculed and taken lightly, and just said that there was someone very suspicious in the neighborhood. Needless to say, they did not see him or anyone suspicious. But we know who we saw. He was the farmer himself. That was how I knew that I was not crazy. There was indeed a psycho walking around in a farmer's attire, with the intent to stab and slash people with a sickle during the festive period. However, I could not explain how or why future victim Stephanie called actual Stephanie to initiate the events that would later save my life. Hence all my questions at the beginning of this story, and of course all investigations did not lead anywhere. After we saw him that night, my mother and I struggled to find peace and sleep for days. We moved weeks later for our mental state. Fortunately, we never saw him again, and I have never experienced something as extraordinary as that call up to now. And I still work at the same place. Somewhere in my heart, I still feel the dread born from the possibility that the farmer could be watching me from afar, waiting for the right moment to strike. I created a new plant. It's gonna hurt a lot of people. I'm a scientist, a genetic engineer working in a secret facility hidden deep within a remote area. For privacy reasons, not to mention the safety of the general public and my colleagues' reputations, I will not disclose the exact location of the site. The facility was small with 2 sleeping chambers fit for housing at most 3 people each, alongside a testing chamber nearby, a common room fitted with uncomfortable, dull couches and a wooden ebony table. The cafeteria was connected to it by a narrow hallway and had enough food to supply us for a month. The purpose of this facility was the design of a new species of plant life. Not just any, though. It was meant to be a solution to global warming. The plant photosynthesized at a much faster rate compared to others, and if placed strategically across the globe accompanied by special growth enzymes, they could in theory remove enough carbon dioxide from the atmosphere to return Earth to a natural temperature. Of course, it was difficult, to say the least. It took us more than a few years to perfect. We had to find the exact, perfect speed of photosynthesis, not to mention the grueling effort of actually nursing the plant. It required much more carbon dioxide than normal plants, not to mention a greater need for water. Sunlight was allowed into its chamber daily through a specially modified rooftop, hidden underneath a thick, crawling canopy of tall, towering trees. It was the only area that received natural light. The rest of the facility was clothed in dirt and soil, a result of centuries of erosion and avalanches. Underground with the worms burrowing through the soil and the fossils of species long forgotten. They were our only company in the desolate building. I could tell the stress of such a mighty endeavor was taking a toll on our mental health. We were 6 in total. Samantha was a social media consultant. She would be in charge of releasing the actual news to the public and tempering their responses. She had decided to stay at the facility after leaving her comfortable apartment, in order to oversee everything and ensure that all her reports would be accurate. I, Jake, and Corel Were the scientists actually doing the work? The only other two employees in the building were janitorial staff meant to ensure a hygienic workplace. All of us were stressed. The first year had been satisfactory. We had bonded, or so I thought, over our love for science and our awe at what we were doing. However, the remote area and the isolation was beginning to wear us down, erode our spirits until there was nothing but dust in the wind. I swore I could sometimes hear the janitorial staff muttering underneath their breath, talking about how they missed their families and how lonely this building was. Corell and Jake were using their work as a distraction, attempting to melt away the mind-numbing boredom with random experiments. Samantha was busying herself with notes, rewriting them multiple times, seemingly with no reason beyond quelling the extreme boredom this place brought them all. I was honestly fine with being alone, but I think even I was beginning to experience the aftermath of being forced to live in a confined space for over 5 years. Talking to myself constantly, pacing throughout my tiny bedroom chamber. I reread my notes at least 10 times per hour, attempting in vain to cease the endless isolation with my own voice, always reminding myself of what we were truly doing, the magnitude of this entire project. I remember the day it all burned down. The ash is still around me. I can hear the slithering of vines and the gentle scraping sound of the thorns brushing against the cold stone floor. It is unyielding, merciless. It has no warmth or light. It devoured whatever was left of that hours ago. We were preparing to undertake the last component of our plan, to undertake the single most important part of the entire project, the part that would prove to all of us that 5 years of all this work had not been for nothing. We were preparing to release the growth enzyme, only in a safe area, of course, far away from any form of life beyond our own and the forest surrounding us. If anything went wrong, the casualties would be next to none. We were unsure of how exactly the plant would react to the enzyme. It had not been tested in such a huge dose before, but we were prepared for anything. Or so we thought. I held the vial in my hand, clutching it tightly as if it was the most precious item in the entire world. I feared it would shatter in my grip any second, but could not find the will to loosen my throbbing fingers. I stared at the glass separating me from my creation, my beautiful, stunning creation. It was colored a vibrant shade of green, perhaps just an effect of the sunlight, but either way it was radiant. Its stem was clothed in thin, flexible, sharp thorns. The leaves were huge, an intricate web of light, dissonant veins shading the greenery. Their margins were bordered by lighter, little, leaf-like structures. It bore no flowers. We had designed it to be capable of survival, able to find some way to live through most things. It reproduced by use of vegetative propagation, regrowing from the stem, leaves, or any other organ that had survived an initial attack. Therefore, it had no use for those attractive organs, despite the cosmetic appeal. The leaf stalks were adorned with curving spines and thorns, each capable of shredding an attacker's mouth to pieces, blood splashing onto the earth. I cautiously entered the chamber, crouching down while holding the vial. I stared at the plant. We had never opted to enter the chamber ourselves before. The risk of the plant capturing any form of pathogens was too great, but this was necessary to ensure that the plant would be able to survive alongside humans. I entered. The glass door slid shut behind me. A voice rang out over the intercom. "Easy does it." Jake's voice resounded around me, echoing along the sun-bathed walls. I rolled my eyes before carefully pouring the liquid onto the ground. The plant began to stir nearly immediately, and I swear, I caught a glimpse of the leaves perking up, as if reacting to the chemical in moments. That was unprecedented, but not entirely impossible. I exhaled deeply, letting out a breath I was not aware I was holding. My lungs expanded and contracted while my chest rose and fell. It was over. Now to observe what happened next. We all silently watched, sometimes leaving to grab a cup of coffee or a bit of food. Our supplies were dwindling, but that was no problem. They were airdropped onto the base every month after all. Enough food to last a month and sometimes a few days longer, give or take. Finally, after noting no noticeable changes to the plant, we sighed collectively. I suggested that perhaps the plant would take a bit more time to process such a heightened amount, but I was not sure of that myself. Honestly, at this point it took everything to not break down. We had worked so hard for nothing. Of course, it was not for nothing, but it was not what we were expecting either. I still recall the looks of horror and awe as we all stared at Jake. He had volunteered to continue observing the plant, and his diligence was rewarded with death. His corpse was drenched in blood, and the thorns stuck out from every inch of his body. They rippled and dived deeper and deeper, and I resisted the urge to gag at the squelching sounds it produced. That was when I noticed the vines slowly creeping around Samantha's ankle. By the time I could scream, it was already slithering down her throat. She did not even have time to say a word. No last words. Not even a syllable. The vine flew straight into her chest, moving past bone and flesh to find what it so desperately craved. I kicked off another before sprinting. The facility was small but had tons of closets to hide in. I could hear the screaming voices of all my partners and perhaps even friends, as the vines crawled all over their flesh, plunging deep within their chests and breaking past the barrier of bone. I can still hear their cries, to be honest. I do not know why the plant went after us, but I know that this place will not be its only victim. As of now, the facility has been placed into lockdown, but I know that someday it will be freed. Remember how I said that supplies were airdropped? Well, it will happen again. The roof will split open to receive the package, and the plant will leap at the opportunity to find more of whatever unknown pleasure it gains from its depraved act of murder. Hell, for all I know, it might already be free, able to find some way out, some hidden entrance, a hole in a wall, whatever. I am writing this to warn you. I can already feel the vines creeping around my ankles, the thorns gently grazing my ankles. It's a dark place, the imagination. Sometimes it conjures up horrors greater than the truth, but I know what is coming, for me and for you. If you ever find a vibrant green plant covered in thorns and as large as a fully grown tree, run. Do not even wait. Do not hesitate. Just run. Do not call the authorities. Do not do anything. Just run. Run as fast as you can. It might just buy you a few more moments. I've had headaches my whole life. Crushing, pounding pain deep within my skull. Often I'm afraid my skull will splinter and the shards will puncture my brain. There are days when the pain is a dull throb. Other days the pain can be blinding. If it's bad enough, my nose will bleed. Sometimes when the pain somewhat subsides, I find that I have the ability to think straight enough to wonder if some invisible monster is slowly crushing my head. However, for as bad as my headaches are, nothing is wrong with me. I honestly can't remember the amount of times I've gone to the hospital desperate to find the source of the agony. No matter how many times I've gone, the doctors have never found anything wrong with my head. Multiple x-rays and brain scans show nothing amiss. Everything's fine. Unless my nose bleeds, people often don't believe me. I've had this pain for as long as I can remember. I'm often told I was a problem child because I cried so much. Of course I told them I was in pain, but when the doctors couldn't find anything wrong with me, it was easier to say I was being a brat. You'd think that after this long of complaining they'd believe me, but since I haven't died, no one is concerned. Suppose I'll have to live with this pain for the rest of my life. After all, I'm 18 and I can't even imagine what it's like to be okay. Sometimes I think I might lose my mind. The pain is maddening, constantly there like a parasite. The pain is there when I go to bed and it's there when I go to sleep. Although sleep is a rare thing, but I suppose I can't complain if I'm getting any sleep at all. It's probably my favorite part about life, since it's the only time I feel peace. On the other hand, there are times where I've thought that the only way to get rid of the pain is to off myself. Yet somehow, I've managed to hold on to the foolish thought that someday, I'll be rid of these torturous headaches. Or maybe they'd better be described as migraines. I don't care anymore. The sad part is I'm used to the pain by now. Don't get me wrong, it's just as awful as it's always been. However, I think I've managed to get better control over the crying and screaming and writhing in agony. Today, like any other, the pain pulses through my head. It throbs, a pounding sensation within my skull. However, I smile and grit my teeth, because today I'm visiting my aunt and her new fiancé. They've been dating for 5 years now, and he finally asked her to tie the knot. They've invited us over to celebrate the engagement. I don't care, I just want to get this over with so I can go back to bed and deal with my headache in peace. It's not that I don't like my aunt or her new fiancé. I just can't stand the not-so-subtle attitude in response to my obvious pain. They all just think I'm lying, like it's some weird game I've been playing since I was born. When we, my parents, sister, and I arrive at my aunt's house, her fiancé opens the door and greets us with a smile. He's handsome, but the poor guy lacks any bit of common sense. Though I suppose he's sweet and he treats my aunt right, that's probably what she ultimately sees in him. My aunt's fiancé, or Robert as we know him, shakes my father's hand warmly. Hey, how's everybody doing? Claire's in the living room. Claire, my aunt, is right where Robert says she is. She's sitting on the couch drinking some sort of beverage. I don't know what it is. I don't care. When my aunt sees us, she beams, quickly getting up to give my mother, her sister, a hug. It's so good to see you. I'm so happy you were all able to come today. My mother returns her smile, squeezing her back in their hug. I don't care. My head hurts so much. The food is done. It's already waiting outside. My aunt leads us into the backyard where no fence exists and ends at a road. I guess we're eating outside, or something. I didn't even know we would be eating. As my mother and aunt began chatting with the familiarity of sisters, my father nudges me slightly. You keep grimacing. Well, sorry, Father. I don't suppose you know what it's like for your head to be constantly sat on by Satan's fat ass. I let out a small sigh, walking ahead like a prisoner about to be sentenced to their death. Dramatic, yes. Do I care? Of course not. I wince as a screech pierces the air. Yes, I've forgotten about my 3-year-old cousin. She's never quiet, and I remember the number one reason I dread coming over. She's running around with my aunt's dog, Cricket. The second reason I dread coming over. Cricket's horribly loud barking makes my head spin, and I try not to vomit at the fresh wave of pain it causes. Please, I want to go home. For as much as I complain, I guess I should have mentioned that my sister is the only one who believes me about my never-ending headache. I should be thankful, but my headache leaves me constantly irritated at everything. However, I try to smile. She's trying to be considerate, which I truly appreciate. It's somewhat peaceful at first, until my vision is temporarily blurred as my head is pierced with agony. Why is my aunt screaming? I look up and I see the reason. My little cousin is running towards the road as a large truck is about to drive by. The pain in my skull makes it difficult to fully grasp the situation, but I still notice my sister leaping out of her seat. Conveniently, my sister happens to run track at school. She's apparently the fastest runner on her team. I can't even manage a whimper as I watch everything unfold, not even paying attention to everyone else getting out of their seat to run behind my sister. It all happened so fast. It's not like the world suddenly slowed as you often hear. I was barely able to even process it. My sister, faster than what I thought was possible, managed to reach our cousin in time. She yanked her back by her chubby little arm and onto the grass behind them, just as the truck drove by. However, as she'd done so, my sister had used her weight to yank our cousin back as fast as she could. As the truck kept driving, my sister fell forward onto the road, the vehicle's front and back tire running over her head. In an instant, her head split open like a watermelon as blood and bits of her brain coated the pavement. My mother's screams were deafening. I couldn't breathe. My heart was pounding and my palms were slick with sweat. In a blink, I'm sitting on my aunt's back porch with my cousin and Cricket as I watch the paramedics put my sister's body onto a stretcher and lift her into the ambulance. As my parents and aunt sob in despair ahead of me, I realize distantly that my head has stopped hurting. What I'd failed to notice was the stinging pain beginning to spread around my neck. My family and I live in a duplex that is split into an upper and lower level. My two daughters and I have lived in the bottom portion of the building for many years, and we've seen various people move in and out of the upper portion of the building. There was this old man who lived upstairs for a few months. Before the pandemic, we called him Mr. Woodtips because he smoked these very distinctive wood-tipped cigars. The old man probably smoked 15 of these cigars a day. He just stood outside pacing on the stairs in front of our building for like half of the day, every day, but there walking around and smoking these little cigars. I actually liked the scent though, but he would pace by our door and we would smell the smoke when he walked by. And we would hear him out there coughing and hacking away. The man was in poor health. I think he hacked and coughed more than he did any actual breathing. Like I said though, the man only lived there for a few months, but my family and I became very familiar with him over this short period of time. He would often yell and curse at people walking their dogs, or sometimes fall over and knock the trash cans in the street. The police came on 2 separate occasions because the man was causing problems. My daughters were very cautious of him, and when they walked by, they'd look down at their phones. The man always stared at my daughters, though, which made me extremely uncomfortable. But I wasn't sure there was anything I could do aside from confronting the man publicly. It got to the point where my youngest daughter would not leave the house if Mr. Woodtips was outside. She'd peek through the blinds in her bedroom and wait for him to go back inside before running out to the bus stop. She started talking about wanting to move somewhere new, which was a major red flag. We had lived in the building since she was a baby. I eventually sat her down and explained that Mr. Woodtips was an old man who had probably experienced a lot of pain in his life and was down on his luck, but that didn't mean he was a bad person. I told her to be cautious, but treat the man with respect. I stopped seeing Mr. Woodtips a few weeks later. His newspapers began stacking up on his doorstep, and eventually someone called the police to do a wellness check. The duplex manager came a few days later to move his things. I assumed he died, but looking back, I'm not totally sure. There would be times where I'd still smell his distinctive cigar smoke. Like someone was smoking really close to me, but there was never anyone nearby. My girls were still terrified of the man, mentioning him constantly. They also talked about smelling the smoke. There would be nights where my younger daughter would scream and cry, and I would run into her room and turn on the lights. She'd swear she'd seen Mr. Woodtips looking through her blinds. I would open the window and look outside and tell her everything was okay, and it was just her imagination, and that Mr. Woodtips had passed away. But it freaked me out, especially because sometimes I would smell that distinctive cigar smoke when I opened the window. It began affecting her sleep, and I considered hiring a therapist even though I really didn't have the money and my job didn't cover healthcare costs. After a while, it began affecting my sleep too because I was so worried about my daughter. My daughter's school called me in for a parent-teacher conference after she got detention for screaming at another child in her class. At this point, we decided it would be best to involve a professional. She was still having trouble at night and was convinced Mr. Woodtips would watch her sleep, and was hiding in the flower bed outside her window. It literally broke my heart because I didn't know how I could help her or fix the situation. All I could do was continue the therapy and hope for the best. A therapist believed my daughter might be having a difficult time processing the death of the man, and this was her way of dealing with these new existential feelings she was experiencing. He explained that it was a fairly common thing for girls my daughter's age. After many months in therapy, things seemed to be improving. My daughter was having less panic attacks and seemed to be sleeping better. She was still scared of Mr. Woodtips and would sometimes have nightmares that he was underneath her bed or hiding in the walls. She described hearing his lungs wheeze and pop, and seeing the faint orange glow of a cigar from underneath her bed. Despite the nightmares, the therapy was helping her. I could see it in her face. She was getting in less arguments with her sister, and would go and visit friends on the weekend. She even joined a few clubs at the school. It wasn't long before my daughters seemed to forget about the whole Mr. Woodtips situation. I guess I'm really the only one who is still hung up on it. There will be times where I catch a faint orange glow out the corner of my eye, and I will run to the window, but it will be someone's brake lights or something. There will be times where I'm walking outside and I still smell the smoke. I have no idea where it is coming from, but it seems to follow me sometimes. I know it is a popular brand of cigars, and it's possible I'm just paranoid, but it's a very distinctive smell and I smell it a lot. There have been times where I'm laying in bed and I smell it. I guess I'm writing this post because it's gotten to the point where I really can't ignore this anymore. And constantly thinking about this person is really starting to affect me negatively. I'm afraid to bring up the topic with my girls because they seem to be doing so much better. And I really don't want to add any validity to their stories or make them think this is a problem. It's taken us so much to even get to this point. I guess I'm just looking for help. Please tell me there is no way this dead old man is stalking my family. Do you think I should try seeing a therapist? Or voicing these concerns with my daughter's therapist? There have been many times where I've considered calling the police to look around the outside of the building, but I'm afraid it might make me look crazy, and it may have negative consequences for my living situation. I've also considered setting up a camera in my daughter's room, or putting a smoke detector by the window just so I have some form of evidence. When I smell the smoke and hear noises, many times I'm too terrified to get up and walk outside. or even look out the window at this point. Please help. I really have no idea what to do. We were almost done cleaning our new home, only the attic was left. We were putting it off till there was nothing else left to do. Attics creeped us both out. After an hour of coughing, lungs full of dust, inhaling random bugs into our mouth, spiders tickling our neck, webs hanging from our clothes, we were completely on edge. So when his fingers brushed my hand, jumping 4 feet into the air was a natural outcome. Losing my balance, I crashed into the side and the plaster gave way. I landed into a well-hidden cubbyhole. Hands on our hips, we surveyed the belongings of the time capsule we had inadvertently opened. Things in the cubbyhole were well preserved, untouched by the hands of time. There were trinkets, but the main attraction was a pristine dollhouse, an exact replica of the house we were in. We peered inside to see 2 dolls peering back at us from the attic. They looked a bit like us. What are the chances, we thought. We brought it down to the kitchen. It was too beautiful to be left in the attic. Exhausted, we slept as soon as our heads hit the pillow. When I came down the next morning, my husband was hunched over the dollhouse. I checked over his shoulder to see a small baby doll in a pink gown, looking up at us, and the 2 older dolls were lying in a heap in the kitchen. "That wasn't there before," I exclaimed. He turned so fast that we both crashed onto the floor, all arms and legs. That is when the doorbell chimed. We opened the door to a little girl in a pink gown. She looked like the baby doll. We looked at each other. Did the dollhouse foreshadow this? We were being silly, right? "Mama, Papa, I'm back," the little girl said. We tried explaining we weren't her mom and dad, but she just hugged me and, well, she was adorable. I was very happy to play mom to Gia, but my husband had doubts. One day while she slept, we had our first argument. "Who is she? Where did she come from?" he asked. "How does it matter? We wanted a kid and there she is. Don't you just love her?" I asked. "No, I don't. This whole situation is creepy." He huffed, turned, and slept. He didn't come down the next day. While I made lunch, Gia played with the dollhouse. I gasped when I saw her throw the male doll from the roof. The doll's leg bent at an awkward angle. Some instant, I heard my husband shout. I ran out to see him clutching his leg as he writhed in pain. His leg was broken. He later told me that he felt as if a hand plucked him from the balcony and threw him off it. I was very stressed, taking care of everything on my own, so when Gia broke my grandmother's urn, I shouted at her. She looked at me angrily, her eyes dilating into black discs before she ran off. Immediately feeling guilty and afraid, I ran after her. She turned and grinned at me as she taped a toy cleaver to the male doll's hand and walked him down to the kitchen. "Sam, run!" My husband's pained voice called out from behind me. There he stood as if propelled by a force, arms swinging a cleaver, broken leg supporting his twisted frame as he tried to fight whatever it was. It was too strong and he lunged towards me. I remember screaming and I ran towards the old broom closet. I just managed to close it as he pounded the door. I switched on the bulb in the dank, cramped closet as I rocked on my haunches. That's when I saw it. Scribbled behind the frame was a note. "Hide the cursed, indestructible dollhouse in the cubbyhole and cover it well on a moonless night. That is the only way to stop Gia. Save yourself." Stroking Gia's golden curls that night, I shivered a little, realizing how close we had come to dying that day. I am still amazed that we survived. "Sweetie, I'm sorry. I will never shout at you again. Let Mama come out. You know Mama loves you a lot, right? I begged Gia. Thankfully, that was enough to placate her, at least for now. My husband looked like a rag doll that's been through a wash cycle, but hey, he was alive. I hugged Gia first, then took care of my husband. Didn't want to antagonize her till the next moonless night. As the realization hit me, my hand stopped just for a moment. Gia looked up, her eyes boring into me as they turned darker, eating away at my soul. I hastily started caressing her again and sang a lullaby to distract her. My mind was racing. So she doesn't know what is written, only what is said. After all, she had no idea what I posted that night. That can work to our advantage. Leaving the sleeping Gia snuggled to her doll, I went to our bedroom. I signaled my husband to be quiet, and I messaged him to let him know about the note on the closet door, and then I went digging in the attic. The cubbyhole must hold some clues. I found rolled up notes looking as fresh as the day they were sealed in with the dollhouse. If you are reading this, that means the cubby has been opened, and the demon is back. These notes contain the story of Gia the best I could find them from the locals, newspapers, and more means. I have already lost my whole family. Save yours. I hope this will give you some answers. This house belonged to the renowned doll makers Jeremy and Brooke. Jeremy had designed this house himself, using a dollhouse. Yes, the same dollhouse that you found. Their specialty was making lifelike dolls, and intricate details made them look alive, but with the advent of modernization, cheap dolls were flooding the market and nobody cared for handmade dolls anymore. They had to make sales to make ends meet, and one of their buyers was a shaman practicing the dark arts. They had suspicions but were in no state to object to good money. Through a stroke of luck, they got a contract from the city's council. They had to create dolls for all the contests and giveaways the council will conduct. They didn't need to sell anywhere else anymore, but their good fortune brought a curse in its wake. They had a daughter, Gia, apple of their eye. She loved to play in the beautiful woods outside till her mom would call her for supper. Brooke's voice went hoarse that day, calling Gia for dinner, but only the silent, damp darkness of the woods returned to her heart, empty-handed. The search lasted for 2 months before the heavy rain made it impossible to continue. In their grief, Jeremy and Brooke turned to making small dolls that looked like Gia. One day, Jeremy came down to breakfast and Gia was waiting for him at the table alongside Brooke. Overjoyed, he hugged her limp body and recoiled in horror as he realized it's just a doll. Brooke didn't even look up. She kept mumbling, "I will never let you go," again and again. The thunderous knock of the door snapped them both out of their paralysis. The shaman had come with a proposal they couldn't refuse. He could bring back Gia, if only they gave all of the Gia dolls to him. Of course, they jumped at the opportunity. After 3 days of rituals involving blood sacrifice, black smoke, and occult symbols, Gia's doll was animated. "Mama, Papa, I am back." What had come back was clearly not Gia, but the couple didn't care in their grief. Shaman left with the other dolls, and those have been playing havoc on their unsuspecting couples ever since. That's a story for another time. The couple was seen with bruises covering their body, black, blue, green, each hue telling a different story. They would brush it off by saying how they tripped or fell due to clumsiness. Then the unthinkable happened. Cops actually found Gia. She had partial amnesia and didn't know where she was held captive, but otherwise fine. When the cops reached Jeremy and Brooke's house with Gia, the imposter Gia had vanished. What happened in that house that day is a mystery, but the cops had to come back to the house the very next day. The entire family had vanished without a trace under suspicious circumstances. None of their belongings were taken. It just seemed like they fell off the face of the earth. Anyway, after a few years, my family bought the house. We redecorated, but didn't touch the beautiful dollhouse in the living room display. I will not go into the specifics of my story, as the new moon night is already upon us, and I need to seal this in as well. To cut a long story short, my family started seeing a little girl around the house with gleaming black eyes, and then accidents started happening. Our family seemed to be plagued with tragedy. My sweet, never-heard-a-fly grandma had gone on a frenzy. That's when I hid in the kitchen closet and found the scratched note. I think either Jeremy or Brooke scratched it on the fateful night. Sadly, it was too late for my family, but these notes chronicle a summary of all my research. Hope they help you. I will be sealing this along with the dollhouse today, September 5th, 2013. I stood with my mouth agape. The last owner had abandoned the house in 2013 and vanished, and that's why we got it cheap. They were definitely successful in sealing the dollhouse. And what happened to them? I didn't have the luxury of time to worry about it, so I went about planning and preparing. Some ideas I got from my commenters, and I hid survival kits. Hid most things that can do serious harm, and just worked on keeping Gia happy. I made it to today. The new moon night. Gia seems especially weak today. I think I can pull it off. Wish me luck. Max, stop that, please. I mumbled, trying to hide my mix of annoyance and fright. I really didn't want to make a fuss out of this, but he had to stop doing that. I was already getting goosebumps and couldn't hide it anymore. There's no one around here, not even crickets. I'm just whistling to make the time go by faster. He said that and resumed his joyful whistle, but my calm ran out. Shut it, now. I yelled louder than I thought my already shallow breath would allow me. The echo making me feel remorseful, but at the same time glad there was no whistle anymore. Not realizing I had also grabbed his shoulder. You really didn't have to say it like that, you know. I was just trying to lighten up the mood. I'll not do it again, but what's wrong with you? Your hand is ice cold. He looked at me awkwardly. Reminds me how much I hate football and that I can't whistle myself. I lied. But Max believed me and didn't question further, since he knew football was something not quite up my alley. About the cold hands part, couldn't really give any explanation for it. It was a July evening. It had barely gotten dark and we were walking back home from our evening run through the park. I needed something to clear my head, but I had also needed someone to bring alone first, due to my paranoid nature, so here we were. The thing is, I knew how to whistle. The problem, though, I was afraid to. And I was never going to do it again or risk being around someone who does. My grandfather always told me whistling brought bad luck if you did it outside your house. And even worse things could happen if you whistled while you were outside or outside and alone. Like we were. Obviously, I was young and never heeded that advice and dismissed it as something the elders would say, so we'd stop making so much noise. Needless to say, years later, looking through old photographs in the countryside house we used to own, I came across one depicting him and my grandmother, whom I never met or knew. I always assumed they either divorced or she had died before I was born, since my mother never mentioned someone else apart from her mother. They looked content. Happy would be too much. Nothing out of the ordinary, apart from the fact that the woman had her lips as if she were whistling while the photo was taken. Didn't strike me as weird at all, with all the duck poses my generation does nowadays. The next photograph was one taken around 10 years later. My grandfather was alone in the picture. He seemed serious, trying to smile for the camera, but his eyes were sad. But the one thing that made me stop and slightly choke, my hands getting colder as I grasped the photograph, was next, as I made the connection between what his saying and the woman's lips were the message handwritten on the back of the yellowed photo. I wish I could bring you back, but it has to stay this way. I won't whistle you back home. That's the point where I realized something wasn't quite right, and I was split between actually believing it or dismissing it yet again as old man grief. The decision was never made, since being a teenager was a full-time job and I had no time to spare to actually think and consider things. Alas, my blissful ignorance was short-lived. Before having Max as a running partner, I used to take my dog out for walks every single evening. That was my one and only form of exercise. It all came to an end one cold, fierce winter night. No snow, just pure cold and a feeling of dread of going out and getting actual cold feet. I knew I had to walk the dog, both out of habit and for his daily walk and needs. He didn't seem all that enthused, though, more like restless and unnerved, as if he really would have rather stayed home. I live in a flat, so my choice was to either show him how nice it is outside, or to be awoken at night by him and his need to actually go out. The daylight was short. By the time I had realized it was getting late, I had to rush back home so I wouldn't miss dinner. On my way back home, the dog kept barking around the streets, as if looking for something annoying me further on, since no other dogs were outside. And he doesn't bark at people. His focus seemed to be a lady with a wide-brimmed snow hat walking and gently whistling while looking upwards. Unconsciously, I picked up the whistle and started trying to get my dog's attention. That got it right, and I got in the house, closing the gate on my way in. As I crouched down to unlace my shoes, the dog ran down into the yard and started barking again. But I didn't mind it, since I was already home and I knew the whistling lady had been his attention. But she was 3 streets behind, as well as walking in the opposite direction. The barking stopped, so I tried whistling him back home, as I had already gotten my shoes off. But after a couple of minutes, he was still outside, yet no barking either. Night was already in full bloom, but I could still see that the gate was still closed after I came in, so I knew he must be somewhere in the yard. What stopped my whistling and made me freeze in place was the hat lady that was across the street under a street lamp, with my dog's red leash in one hand, her hat in the other, the whistling lips, and what's worse, the same eyes and face as in my grandmother's old photograph. Not a day older or a wrinkle added. She waved at me with the hand that held the leash, put her hat back on with her other hand, and resumed her walk away from the gate. As she turned around the corner, the whistle was still audible, first due to the echo on the street, then due to the echo of my thoughts, keeping me awake at night. Told my parents that the leash had broken, hence why I missed that too, and the dog had run away. This lie was also believed. We put up some missing posters, but I knew he wasn't going to be back, even if I whistled. This history raced through my mind all over again when Max pointed out my distress caused by his whistling, but I couldn't help it. It was a loose thread in my life in the last few months. The house was the first one up the road. We'd split there, and he would walk on 5 more streets to his. Look, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make you feel nervous or something, he said as my house came into view. I overreacted. I'll see you tomorrow. Everything's alright. I tried to get things back to normal between us, since we haven't talked since I lost my temper, and shouted at him to cease his whistling. As I turned around to close the door, I waved at him thinking that I indeed overreacted, and he waved back while shouting. I did say I'm sorry, but now I can do this all the way back home since you won't hear it. See you tomorrow. As he said that, he started whistling and I closed the door. Slightly angry he'd pick on me with that. But my rapid breathing was a product rather of inexplicable fear than of anger. The following day at school, Max skipped the first class. It seemed he was going to skip the second as well as the next one, so the teacher looked at me and said, "Oh well," he whistled. "Judging by your tired face, I'm guessing you and your desk mate had some late night fun last night." I smiled, nodded, and the teacher went on with the other absentees. After all, I could do no more than nod. I was frozen not only by the fact by hearing a whistle once again in such a scenario, but by the notion that my friend decided to skip school without saying anything apart from that joke whistle he did the previous night. The worst part? It wasn't only that day he skipped. Questions are popping up and my answers are still missing. My name is Julie Winters. I was born on December 13th, 1997. I should be 39 years old now, but I'm not. I'm 24. I've been 24 for 16 years. I can't grow older. I can't die. I've tried both. I was here before. You were here before. All of us were here before. But somehow nobody remembers. Nobody ever remembers. Only me. It's the same thing every time. December 31st, 2022. We're standing in the middle of Times Square, landlocked in the sea of revelers. The ball drops. The countdown. 3, 2, 1, and the calendar turns to January 1st, 2022. Again. In December of 2022, my friends and I had planned to go to Times Square for New Year's Eve, just as we always do, but this time we were going with special purpose, to give a huge middle finger to the past year as well as sail away toward new horizons. Some friends even flew in a few days early for the event. When Prince and the Revolution said they were going to party like it's 1999, I think they had the right predictions. Just the wrong year. But on December 30th, the police announced that while they were still going to drop the ball, nobody would be allowed in Times Square on New Year's Eve. To say that we were disappointed was the understatement of a lifetime. What would we do now? Sit home and watch a live stream of the ball drop? After friends flew here from across the country? They could have stayed home and done that. No, this was not going to go down like that. We were not going to be denied our rite of passage out of this year. When Clark Griswold drives across the country to take you to Wally World, you're going to Wally World, whether Officer John Candy opens the gate or not. I knew that many of the elites were being given permission to watch the ball drop from surrounding locations, and police presence was going to be cut by 80%. Which definitely worked in our favor. The plan was to approach from several blocks away, avoiding 8th Avenue and 42nd Street at all costs. We would gradually get closer while maintaining an aloof presence, as if we were simply on our way somewhere else, not trying to enter the square. With these covert measures, it began to feel like we were trying to avoid detection by occupying forces. It was close to midnight when we made our approach. We couldn't go in early, or we'd risk being pushed out of the area completely by the police before the ball dropped. As some random, nameless pop star finished a bland cover of a John Lennon song, the 30-second countdown began. When the countdown hit 15 seconds, we picked up our pace. 10 seconds, started running. A cop saw us and yelled, "Stop, you can't be here." But it was too late. We were already there, less than a block away from the ball as it was landing, in perfect view. 3, 2, 1. Came through the broadcast in the earbud as the cop was just yards away from us. Happy New Year. I don't remember anything after that. All I remember is that we were in front of the 1 Broadway Avenue when midnight hit, and suddenly it was 3 a.m. and we were back in my place in Queens. I didn't say anything about my missing memory to the others, and they didn't say anything to me. I wondered if the occupying forces had been keeping people away for reasons other than a virus. The next New Year's Eve, 2022. The same group of us met up, except for John. He couldn't make it this year. This time the streets were full. Everything was back to normal. Or so I thought. Everything was going as you'd expect. The flavors of the month were lip-syncing their current radio hits. Talking heads from radio and TV were all talking into microphones and telling their audience how much fun they were supposed to be having. When the countdown reached 10 seconds, the crowd chanted along. 10, 9. Someone cracked a joke about Ryan Seacrest balls dropping. 3, 2, 1. Happy. That's when I came to consciousness back at my apartment in Queens, along with my friends. The same friends, including John, who couldn't make it this year. I turned on my TV and flipped through the playbacks of the celebrations. The number 2022 was splashed everywhere, even across the huge plastic glasses that they were all wearing. My phone said it was January 1st, 3 a.m. Just 3 hours prior, it was December 31st, 2022. I woke up the next day thinking of what a strange dream that was. That is, until I started flipping through social media posts. Everybody was wishing everyone a happy 2022. I thought I must still be dreaming. But the dream didn't end. I continued living every day just as I had the year before. I knew when many things were going to happen before they happened. Some of the things that I didn't remember would hit me after they happened, making me laugh. I tried seeing a psychiatrist. I didn't tell them that I still thought I was repeating the previous year. I presented it as a thing that temporarily plagued me. But I was now aware that it was not real, and I was just trying to figure out how it happened and work with the fallout of it all. When the doc asked me if I still think I'm repeating the previous year, I hesitated before stumbling and saying no. I think he knew I was lying. My birthday came on December 13th, and I turned 25 again, as I had the year prior, before time reset. Again came New Year's Eve in Times Square, and again at midnight, I woke at 3 a.m. in my apartment in Queens, celebrating January 1st, 2022 with the same friends. And it happened again and again. I tried changing things over the year, thinking that I did something wrong and needed to fix it in order for time to finally continue moving forward. None of this worked. After my 8th time repeating 2022, I decided that I couldn't take it anymore. I was going to end it. In mid-July of that cycle, I drove across the George Washington Bridge. Halfway across, I pulled over to the side and leapt. My next memory was of waking up in my apartment in Queens at 3 a.m. January 1st, 2022. I can never die. No matter what happens to me, time keeps resetting. This year, one thing changed. After the ball dropped and the countdown hit 0, I did not suddenly wake up at 3 a.m. in my apartment. This time in the stroke of midnight, we stayed exactly where we were on the street in front of 1 Broadway. The sea of revelers from December 31st, 2022 suddenly disappeared. 1 second prior, we couldn't move. Now we were standing alone in front of the ball. Streets empty. Still New Year's Day 2022. Just no 3-hour time and space shift to my apartment. I no longer care if I am deemed mad or insane. I am telling my story publicly in order to try to find anybody else who remembers the reset. I haven't yet met anybody who remembers, so now I am casting the widest net possible by telling my story online. Please contact me if you remember. There has to be someone. Signed, Julie Winters. Every school has their little weirdos no matter what grade. Some more than others, but us weirdos gotta stick together. Back in the 5th grade, my buddy Tim got a lot of shit. Not like the kid dressed weird or anything, but was just a kid that got a target on his back. He was the best at playing swords and stuff, though. We'd be out in the field, flying around in spaceships or fighting off a mob of samurai. Even then, the kids never messed with me. Only him, for whatever reason. Tim was my boy, and we looked after each other. Most of the kids couldn't understand why I was so nice to him, and I'd always say, "Well, I'm nice to you, aren't I?" They'd usually scoff and walk away while we snuck in a middle finger before anyone saw us. It's kind of our thing. That year, when the talent show came around, Tim was pretty excited. He has been honing his pretending skills, as he would say. Tim did everything to be good at making things seem real, because that was the only time he was truly happy. His dad was kind of a dick since he was drunk all the time and just wanted his boy to be a real man and watch sports and shit. Guy was a real douche. Anyway, a week before the talent show, Tim came up to me talking about how he figured it out and he couldn't wait to show everyone. I threw it out there that he could show me, but he shook his head with a giant smile on his face. The longest week of my life, but I was itching to see what Tim threw together. It was his turn and he came decked out in black and white. He was a hell of a mime. Granted, I've never seen one beforehand, but I thought he did pretty damn well. Whereas the other kids just laughed. He got pretty far along, but you can tell he started getting discouraged the longer it went on, to the point where one of the cool kids ended up throwing something at him. Thankfully, the teacher snatched him up right then and there, but the damage was done. Tim burst into tears and walked off stage. You'd think he'd stay home for a couple days, but his dad just laid into him about being a baby and crying in public. So he made him come right back to school, and the kids just didn't let up. My birthday was coming up, and I thought I had a pretty good plan and set it into motion. I was going to give Tim a second chance and make the class sit and watch. I talked to my mom about it, and we made the invites that day. I passed them out the next day in class, and I told Tim about the plan just so he wasn't blindsided. He was surprisingly ecstatic about it, and how he's gotten so much better, and how he couldn't wait to try out his new act. The day of the party, everything was going swell, minus the fact that Tim didn't show up. Well, at least I didn't think he was. The kid showed up fashionably late, suited up and ready to go, carrying his imaginary bag of props. All the parents were saying how cute it was, and the kids did what they could to hold in their laughter so they wouldn't get scolded in front of everyone, especially when he put his imaginary back down and pulled out an invisible hammer, then went to work seemingly barricading every doorway and window in the living room. I was quite impressed. Tim called me over to help out, and so I did. Didn't think anything of it until he handed me that imaginary hammer, and it had weight to it. At the time, I assumed it was an in-the-moment type thing, and just started hammering away. When all was said and done, he walked me to the corner of our living room, made a box around me and motioned for me to stay still. The parents clapped as he took center stage, in front of the TV, and the kids just sat on the floor in front of him. Tim put on a little mime show. You know, not being able to move a water bottle and running into imaginary walls. Cute kid stuff. He stopped mid-act to walk back over to me and smiled when slapping his forehead like he forgot something. He then closed my box and pulled out what I assumed was a power drill to make holes in my box. Tim walked back up to the front and tapped that devil child Jacob on the shoulder for assistance. Jacob got up laughing like, "Oh, this stupid kid," and tried to make some fun, but Tim just played it off. Tim took out some imaginary tools and made another box around the kid, then turned around and bowed. Jacob tried to move and started freaking out while everyone applauded the mime as Tim put up a finger to silence the crowd. And that's when shit hit the fan. Jacob was starting to panic like he couldn't breathe or something, and Tim motioned like he forgot the kid was in there. Like saying, oopsie, but without words. Tim pretended to press some buttons on the side of Jacob's box, and Jacob started to get smaller. Not like he was shrinking, but like the box was, and at that point, he was full-blown panicking. The parents were looking around at each other nervously. But the kids just laughed until they realized Jacob was serious, when he started screaming without a sound. The kids started screaming when they saw Jacob's bones had started snapping one after another while the parents were trying to figure out how to open his invisible prison. All while Tim took another bow, and he looked over at me and winked with a smile. Not going to lie, I pissed myself right then and there, thinking he thought I was a dick for putting him in this situation. Jacob's dad started freaking out and yoked Tim by his collar, yelling at him saying, "Get him the fuck out of there." Tim spoke no words and just shook his finger in the guy's face. Remember, we're in 5th grade at the time, so Jacob's dad could have beaten him senseless, but Tim had a show to put on. It was like being back at school playing pretend swords in the field where Tim was a lone Ronin. That was efficient in the quick draw technique. He never lost a fight, and he wasn't about to now. Tim gripped the invisible sheath at his waist and ripped the imaginary blade diagonally across Jacob's dad's chest. Jacob's dad let go of Tim and flicked the floating blood off his blade before placing it back in his sheath, as the guy started spewing blood from his wound. The other parents were too concerned with Jacob himself watching his body get compressed into a pile of bone and viscera, covered in a blanket of skin while his father fell to the ground in two. Tim took another bow, then walked to the center of the room, placing a device on the floor. The rest of the parents trembled in fear, trying to find a way out with their kids. But Tim had already sealed off the exits. Tim pressed something on the device he placed on the floor and left out the front door. The kid didn't even look back. Everyone rushed to the door behind him, but it didn't even matter. The door could have been open and they still wouldn't have been able to get out. They were like animals trapped in a cage, and I was still trapped in a box inside that cage. Everyone started getting pushed into the walls like there were walls closing in from the middle of the room. Some pushed against the invisible walls while others held on to their kids in uncontrollable sobs. I thought we were all screwed, and worst of all, it was all my fault. All my parents wanted to do was hold me one last time before we were all smashed from some invisible walls, but they couldn't even do that because I was trapped in a fucking invisible box. Like balloons, everyone just popped and painted the walls red. Tim had a cutout in the wall the size of the box I was placed in, so all that was left of my parents were their arms that were hugging the front of my prison, and their remains that were squeezed through the air holes. When all was said and done, my parents' blood covered the box, showing there was a doorknob on it that I didn't notice before, or it just wasn't there beforehand. I couldn't tell you, to be honest. I let myself out and held what was left of my parents until my aunt came back from the store and saw the bloodbath before her. Cops came, but it's not like they could get anything out of the kid who wouldn't talk. Not like I could have done all that. So they chalked it up as a wild animal wandering in, making a meal of everyone and leaving a kid mute due to the traumatic experience. They didn't explain the writing in blood saying, "Us weirdos gotta stick together," on the front door that they chose to ignore. At first glance, Shelley seemed like a good enough girl. Her role in our company was an entry-level thing. She had that childish nervousness where you could tell she sees us all as adults, superiors, people with insights that remain hidden to her. She was reluctant and insecure, but that much is to be expected. We've all been there. Shaky voice the first time we negotiated salaries. acting over grateful, over enthusiastic, feeling over panicked about bullshit. Yeah, I've been there too, sort of, but I got out of it fast. Incompetence, though, that's the real problem. With some people, you can't say if they're just that unlucky or that incompetent. Incompetence is a vortex. When the label sticks onto you, every move you make is seen through that lens. And Shelley thought that's what was happening to her. That it was unfair. Our boss is a dickhead. He wrote half-literate emails, was almost stubbornly hard to understand, as if he wanted people to feel perpetually confused, until you realize he just wanted to preserve the right to blame others if things go wrong, and got into blaming rants whenever there was an issue or someone made a mistake. We've all been there, and I usually moved on quite easily or let him have it right back, then talk shit about him to a colleague over drinks. For fuck's sake, he was our boss, not a dictator. But poor, insecure little Shelley got pretty traumatized when he let her have it the first few times. Sometimes she felt just awful because he was right and she did wrong. Other times she was broken by the injustice because she just didn't understand what he wanted of her. He wasn't clear. She was just trying to do what he said. Use your fucking head, Shelley. He'd interrupt. Of course, when she attempted to take any small initiative, on the verge of panic, it would go unnoticed or it would go wrong and he'd yell again. Panic doesn't really help a nervous and inexperienced person do better, and Shelley's panic was growing more and more every day. Why didn't she just get another job? Who knows? Maybe she needed the money. Maybe it was hard getting through that door, and a few month-long work experience with a pissed ex-boss doesn't look good on an unimpressive resume. Or maybe she just didn't have it in her to even initiate that topic with him. The problem was that soon it wasn't just him who had an issue with Shelley. Well, the rest of us there mostly commiserated with each other's feelings for him and did our job the rest of the time. She never quite fit in with us. For one, we were all at least semi-useful to each other. We know how to do our part. She was unsure about hers, and no one had the patience to teach her. Lara, the girl who interacted with her most often due to her position, always had an aversion. She had no patience for this girl who walked around asking stupid questions, hoping for validation and approval. Plus, Shelley did make mistakes, and correcting them was annoying. So she started lashing out at Shelley too and making comments about her to the rest of us. Whether she was being fair or not, none of us cared that much, and it quickly took on. Now everyone noticed everything that was wrong with Shelley. Eye-rolling and snickering were common when she did or said something dumb, even if as an isolated incident, it was a fair mistake. We all made mistakes, sure, but our image was solid. We weren't labeled. We could say, "Ah, fuck," and move on. But she couldn't. Quite literally, too. She always over-apologized or stupidly apologized, like by using emojis when called out on the group chat. Fair enough. It was informal and others used emojis too, but when she did it, we could only see immaturity and stupidity radiating from it. I had a phase when I was in a pretty good mood. I handled some major projects well. Dickhead was talking about a promotion. Colleagues appreciated me. I could spend half a day on Reddit and no one would notice shit because I was competent, comfortable, knew my shit. My personal life was going great too. Me and my girlfriend Cynthia had a lot of fun. Going out was fun. Netflix in bed was fun. Hangovers were fun. I was happy. I normally didn't pay much attention to Shelley. I was played enough with her, but didn't shy away from some ridicule at times. But when I saw her all nervous and alone, I took pity on her. Filled with energy and the idea that I had awesomeness to share, I gave her a little special attention one day, chatted with her a bit, showed some interest. She was so grateful for this attention. She latched onto me. She started opening up a bit, asked me about some projects she was unsure of. It was all so easy. It just took some knack to understand our boss. I took some time with her and deciphered the request, gave her some pointers. She looked at me as if I were Jesus. Later, she asked me if I could take a look at her work. It took me a few minutes to validate her, compliment her, point at some small error. She thanked me profusely as I saved her from a death sentence. Give a little suggestion to make it even better, and she was done. Apparently it went well and she didn't get yelled at. I truly enjoyed feeling like a good person. For a while, I dug the whole thing. Her admiration and respect, playing a mentor. I even defended her in front of others. I said she's just inexperienced and anxious. Laura said I'd regret getting involved soon enough. She was right. As work life went on, new projects came along. Dickhead was in a shit mood and my happiness started wearing out. I started feeling overwhelmed, irritable. Cynthia started taking too much of my time when I didn't work. It seemed I had little time to focus on anything else between the two and I was in a shittier mood. Nothing major, just regular ups and downs. Moods that come and go. Nothing was horribly different than the phase before. It just didn't feel as good and my energy and attention span felt tested. Suddenly, Shelley's little interruptions didn't give me a feel-good ego kick anymore. They were just bothersome. She became a burden. She now saw me as her knight who will protect her against dickhead and mean coworkers, and she didn't dare to fart without checking with me first. It was always, "Could you take a look at this?" Or, "Hey, does this look fine?" Or, "Richard asked me to do blah blah. What does that mean?" First, I got colder. I ignored her more often or replied much later with, "Sorry, no idea. Check with him." Or, "Kind of busy. I'm sure it's fine." Or, "Ask Lara. That's her department." I stopped encouraging and validating her victim complex. Yeah, Richard is a pain. Lara has a bad temper. Whatever. In the end, it's still your job. You're an adult. Fucking handle it. I came to agree with everyone. She was just not competent. I shared my analysis based on my first-hand experience. As much as she seems like an abused little puppy, she's a professional victim. The narrative in her head that probably makes her so prone to mistakes is that the world is conspiring against her. I mean, shit. I started agreeing with Richard's point of view more than with hers most of the time. And trust me, there wasn't a situation where I didn't consider him to be a moron. But she's not learning. She's not handling herself. As soon as she got someone to listen, it was just complaint after complaint. Yeah, she gets shit for a small grammar error or a missed attachment, but she's also oblivious about her level and about the amount of responsibility others handle. It was her job to focus on small shit and do the nonsense that should make our lives easier. She'd take about 1 hour to even draft an email because she's so paranoid. The rest of us don't have time for that. She had this misconception that everyone else was relaxed, that everything fell on her, that everything was unfair. She just didn't get it. Although she had no self-confidence in her victimhood, she seemingly found the way to be the martyr. And that made her more arrogant than any of us. It made her distasteful to me. I went from losing interest to seeing her as a nuisance I had an urge to put down. I guess because she chose to be down and useless. Finally, I snapped at her for sending a message when I was relaxing at home on my day off. I was already telling her more and more aggressively to figure things out herself. I said, "Shelley, stop asking me inane questions. Do your job, or look for something else. I'm not your tutor. She profusely apologized, used some dumb emojis. I didn't bother to reply and appease her. After that, I made a point I was not available for conversations with her, and she got the message. Now she was fully alone. Mistakes continued and got progressively worse. Well, all of our moods were pretty intense due to the workload. The more people snapped at her, the more people felt comfortable snapping at her. Fuck, it felt so good to snap at her. We snapped at each other too, but there was always a line. Not so much with her. At one point she tried to stand her ground. I am sure she felt she's a victim of bullying who will now stand up for herself. Except, like everything she did, it completely missed the mark. The moment she gave one of us the attitude was when people went from talking down to her to downright animosity. People called her a moron practically to her face and within her earshot. She gave up. Now she was just sullen, gray in the face, looking physically sick. The air around her was heavy and poisonous. Then she started missing work. Whenever something went on where she knew she needed to coordinate a lot of things with a chance of something not running smoothly, she'd stay at home. Richard was already talking about her as a goner. She was now just a running joke. In fact, I'd even say it bonded us all through the stressful work period. When things went wrong and someone pointed at her, we all sympathized, even if it was Richard saying it. Shelley's days were numbered. Thinking of it now, I'm sure she could feel she entered a state of limbo. No one even asked her to do things. In fact, sometimes one of us would ask for something she'd normally do and another person would helpfully volunteer. Or we'd just politely ask someone else right past her. She was practically ignored all the time. At best, Richard would send her to get coffee or order us lunch. There was something morbid about that time. Although I have to admit her pain gave me some kind of satisfaction I find hard to explain. I guess I just didn't like her. Beyond that, I didn't want her associated with me. There was this divide between people like us and people like her, and in that, she lost her humanity to me. Who she was wrong. She was a leech. She was an irritant. She became even physically ugly, although if you asked me at the start, I'd say she's a cute-ish average. A solid 7. Now she just seemed bloated, sickly, her skin got really bad. But the morbid part I mentioned, it was like having a dead woman walking. She was a corpse. She didn't speak. She tried to make herself invisible, but also imposed on us with her presence. You'd think she'd have the dignity or the decency to just end the misery and quit. But she would still show up where she wasn't wanted, and we watched with more morbid fascination. Richard started interviewing replacements. And then, one day before work, we got a message from Richard to stay home for the day. Apparently, that night, when everyone left, Shelley managed to stay in the building and jumped down 6 floors, falling right in the middle of the lobby. She actually did it correctly and managed to die. I was almost impressed. Of course, there was a shock I felt at first. More accurately, surprise, but was I sad? She didn't really mean anything to me. I contemplated if I should feel guilty, but I didn't really. You don't do that for this. There must be a big, huge context behind why she did it, and whatever my role was, it was marginal. Plus, what should I have done? Kept holding her hand and appeasing her? Even my coworkers showed some irritation after the first few generic, "Shit, I feel so bad for her" messages. In fact, isn't it really sick to do it like that? To make it the company's issue? Well, she wasn't right in the head. We all knew it. Wasn't this just the ultimate act of passive aggression, bordering on evil? I couldn't feel bad for such a person, but I did feel defensive at the same time. I felt that her act pointed the blame at us, including me, and even though I disagreed, I couldn't shake off the discomfort that she found me responsible for what she did. But then it started. Like a virus that spread from her to us, we all started making mistakes. Not just the type of mistakes everybody makes, but bigger, stupider, more and more frequent mistakes. Some were really embarrassing. Franz showed us his Reddit profile while screen sharing during Zoom. I accidentally copy-pasted a morbid curiosity internet search to an email subject line, and I can't for the life of me explain how. Mistakes got bigger. Offensive typos, mentioning the wrong company name, sloppiness, forgetfulness during important presentations. Richard was more and more furious. We were annoyed at each other and downright paranoid of getting called out. The more worried we were about people noticing our mistakes, the more we were on defense looking out for those of others. We never actually talked about it to each other, because talking about it would be a type of admission of incompetence. But I'm sure we all felt that something was wrong about all this, that something was being done to us. You can say that it's easier to think you're cursed than admit your own mistakes. And on one level, I could rationalize that that was what was happening in many ways, but it also felt completely outside of my control. There was a part of me that toyed with the idea that she cursed me, or even worse, that her presence was still there doing it. This is why, of course, I'd never say it out loud or think it for real. Why we never talked about this suspicion and instead just got more and more frustrated with others around us. Richard started firing people. He was a wreck. I got into an argument with him and got fired too. I was shocked. I had fights with Richard before, but I always knew he'd never fire me. I was way too valuable. Now, though, he informed me that for the last few months my work had not been up to standard. That I've been informed about this several times and failed to improve, and that the company suffered for it. Man, fuck that job. But I was pissed. It was actually the most literate email I've ever seen him write. Fine, I thought. I'll regroup and go somewhere else. It's a good thing I'm not working for that imbecile anymore. Plus, maybe in a new place, the curse of Shelley's incompetence would leave me. Cynthia's reaction kind of irked me, though. Instead of being supportive, she was asking me about my financial plans. She's been very naggy lately, and the more stress I had at work, the more she liked to point out my failings or absent-mindedness around the apartment. All trivial nonsense only relevant to a bored mind. I didn't even tell her that I got fired. I told her we all got let go because the business is going bad. But I could see some doubt in the way she looked at me, like she's doubting me and my abilities. Her resentment made me resent her, though she insisted she suggested no such thing. She wasn't unsupportive. What did I say? She asked. It's not what you did. The look on your face and shit you didn't say that says it all. I replied. Perhaps a tad bit dramatically in retrospect. She called me insane. I broke something on my way out. I could hear her curse in the bedroom. It was on purpose, I shouted while slamming the door. We eventually made up, but it wasn't the same. I wasn't the same. It took me a while, 5 months actually, to find another job worth doing. And the bit of freelancing I did in between wasn't always as good as promised. I got paid only 50% of what I was supposed to for my last project because I didn't do it so well, and it had many mistakes, and no one was really rehiring me. I blamed working from home in this fucked up atmosphere with that Karen in the other room, who'd roll her eyes whenever she passed me by as if my presence in the apartment is a sign of my fatal failure. But that little part of me had an entirely different idea about what was happening. and it certainly didn't serve to appease me about my failures. Instead, it was growing anxiety pressing on my chest. I wished it was my fault. I wished it was in my control. But not only did I know that it wasn't, that I didn't know how to change it, I also knew that no one would take my fears seriously. They'd say, "A girl cursed you. She's an evil ghost that causes bad grammar." No, my friend, you're just trying to avoid taking responsibility for your own actions. You don't need an exorcist. You need a therapist. I had some savings. Mom sent some money, but Cynthia's patience was wearing thin. Good to know. I thought while we fought more and more. When I finally got a job and got fired in the first week because of a fuck up, she dumped me. Like, it wasn't about that. It was about me being different. Kind of fuck off. The way I saw it is when things start breaking down, everything follows. Of course I was fucking up. I got it into my head that I am cursed with bad luck, and now I couldn't shake the insecurity and paranoia that things will go wrong, which of course makes things go wrong. I lost my natural touch. Yes, I tried a therapist, although I wasn't crazy about it. Soon enough, I could tell he seemed annoyed at me. When I said that much, he told me I didn't say anything. I told him I saw him roll his eyes. He told me to lower my voice in a condescendingly calm tone. I flipped. He asked me to leave. Not doing that shit again. One day I ran into Richard. He looked disheveled. I've never seen him not wearing a suit before. Now he wore flip-flops, had a neck beard, and just generally looked like shit. Gained some weight, too. We didn't really talk much. He said he was fired by the board of directors, that it was for the best, and that he's working on his mental health now. He was kind of hostile and reeked of alcohol, so I didn't push. I looked up Laura and found out that she attempted suicide and was now in a coma. Her sister left this message on her Facebook. I'm fucking serious. This one shocked me. I imagined this person I knew lying in a coma and felt sick to my stomach. To be fair, she wasn't a friend or someone I was that interested in aside from work. She was fun to flirt with at times, but not my type. But her humanity suddenly felt as real as mine, and her being in a coma felt like an attack on me. I can't explain it. Was it empathy or fear? But I was paralyzed. I tried getting in touch with other ex-coworkers, but found surprisingly little. One left the country and all trace of him seems lost. The other was not responsive and seemed to have deleted all accounts. Much later, I learned he butchered his girlfriend and her daughter around that time, after an argument, and then calmly waited to be arrested. My life continued. I got another job eventually after my painful, discouraging interviews and eating a lot of shit to get a chance with this employment gap. I'm still not quite there. I'm so scared I'll fuck this one up. I stay working until 10 p.m. every day, just double checking everything. It's not like I have much of a life outside of work anyway, or enough money to buy one. Even so, I'm not highly regarded and mistakes still manage to find their way into my work. Stupid errors I can't explain or understand. I notice my new coworkers rolling their eyes at me sometimes, and it takes all that I have to stop myself from reaching and reacting and losing another job. Who the fuck do they think I am? Well, I know the answer to that question. I can't trust myself or my judgment, which causes me to feel constant fear. Saturday nights are the worst. The idea of a whole new week opening up in front of me, with new demands and tasks I have to go through. So many mistakes I'll fail to avoid. It makes me want to stay in bed forever. It's more panic-inducing than anything I've experienced in my life. No horror movie can match the terror of Monday morning. The worst thing about it all is that it's so unfair, and everyone who looks down on me for it is taking part in this injustice. I am being made into something I'm not, and they're all reinforcing that wrong image. For that, I hate them all. Every day I dream and fantasize about getting a gun and just shooting every motherfucker in my workplace. All these idiots who think they're better than me. And maybe Cynthia. Than myself. I stop and with less and less conviction tell myself it's just a phase. There's no curse, no ghost. I'm not doomed. It'll pass and I'll be myself again. Just how long can a phase last? Because I'm running out of patience. And another, more and more convincing part of me wonders, if there is a curse that worked like a virus, could I not spread it onto them just how she did it with me? So that at least they all know what it's like, and that it was never my fault. The hills around the cabin were barren, nothing but ice and rocks, but I knew we'd find the tree here. My brother and I had been in the cabin for 2 weeks, completing ritual after ritual. Jason was frustrated with the process, but I kept the faith for us both. Once again, I prepared for an ice bath. I redrew the pagan runes on the floorboards around the clawfoot tub while Jason made trips outside, bringing snow and chunks of ice by the bucketful. "Help me get inside," I told him. My brother was just shy of his 23rd birthday, but his red beard was already streaked with gray. He took my hand and helped me into the tub where the ice set upon my bare skin like 1,000 tiny daggers. "The book," I said. He retrieved the faded leather-bound text from the vanity. It was old and brittle, and we took great care to not get the pages wet. "You can't even understand that stuff," he complained as I began repeating the prayer. Jason knew quite well that one needn't make a literal translation. It was less about the words and more about the intent behind them. But we'd already had that argument a dozen times now. He sunk into the chair near the tub and held his hunting rifle in his lap while I repeated the rough Proto-Norse text through chattering teeth. After a time, my skin went numb, even as those icy daggers sunk into my bones, but the ice had begun to melt. More ice," I told him. Jason went outside with the bucket. I continued the prayers. He returned a few minutes later, but without the ice bucket. Premature wrinkles had set in around his eyes, and I could have sworn his beard had grayed further. "Morgan," he said, "it worked." The elder pine had sprouted through ice and rock, roughly 50 yards from the cabin. I gazed upon it from the window. It was a towering thing, thick with pine needles. The trunk, at its base, must have been 20 feet wide. The pine blocked out the sun, casting an impenetrable shadow over the cabin. The elder pine was both majestic and stomach-turning. Just looking at it filled me with dread. A passerby might have wondered how a mere tree, however large, could permeate such foreboding, such a sense of wickedness. But this was no mere tree. The whimpering started in the basement again. Jason glanced at the trapdoor, securely padlocked. He wore the key on a chain around his neck. His tools sat on a table near the trapdoor. An acetylene torch with an accompanying face shield, jute rope and string, pincers and knives, a battery-powered angle grinder, needles and bits of thread. "Let's just go home," he said. "It's too late to go home," I answered. I rushed outside before I could reconsider. The raw North Arctic wind promptly gnawed on my naked body. I hadn't gotten dressed after the ice bath. and Jason shouted for me to wait. As I approached the tree, I swore I could see a pair of silver eyes watching me through the pine needles. I stopped before the elder pine. Its shadow was so thick it was like night had fallen. Its branches rattled and something hidden within them let out a low, rumbling growl. "It was me," I told the elder pine. "I called upon you." The silver eyes narrowed. The branches rustled again. I very nearly gave in to my fear, but somehow stood my ground and opened my mouth wide to accept the elder pine. A wet, fleshy proboscis shot out from the branches and filled my mouth. I gagged reflexively but didn't pull away. Somewhere behind me, Jason was screaming my name. The proboscis pushed through my epiglottis aside and entered my larynx in a crude pantomime of medical intubation or oral sex. Panic rolled through my gut when I attempted to draw out and couldn't. The tree's appendage wiggled down my airway, then released its sap into my lungs. I don't remember much about the way we grew up. I guess I blocked most of it out, maybe due to selective amnesia or PTSD. Our father kept us in a room beneath the basement, a room he'd constructed himself. I don't remember what he did to us. I mainly remember the room, the dingy mattress, the ever-present musk of shit and piss from the tin buckets that served as our bathroom. Jason used to say he remembered it all. The things our father did before the cops closed in and he ran off. Before they found us. I don't remember very much aside from the way our father would enter the room with hungry eyes. Eyes like a jackal, and a flask in his fist. A week passed. There were more rituals. Prayer, days-long fasts. In the den in front of the fireplace, I'd drawn a series of runes in a rough circle. I slept there each night on the floor. It wasn't an easy sleep. The visitors outside the cabin didn't help. I could see them in the dark, moonlight dancing off their blue eyes as they gathered like rats around the cabin. They chittered and growled and liked to throw rocks. Jason jumped every time a stone thumped off the walls of the roof. He'd been keeping his rifle close. "Morgan, we can just go," he said. "If you really want to go, then go," I said softly. "But I'm not leaving until we know where he's hiding." Jason wouldn't leave. He hadn't left me before. He wouldn't leave me now. Down in the cabin's basement, the whimpering started again. I noticed the start of the transformation the following morning. As I brushed my hair, I found pine needles in the comb. Something on my back had begun to itch fiercely. I took off my robe. It was tree bark, gray-brown and dripping with sap. As I ran my fingers across it, my stomach suddenly cramped, like something inside wanted out. My knees buckled before I could reach the toilet, and I retched on the floor. I gagged and strained, yet the thing rolling up from my guts came slowly, scratching at my throat and unable to breathe. I got it up with one final, violent spasm. I'd vomited a nearly perfect sphere of sage and mistletoe, though something was moving inside of it. I cracked it open, although a film of blood and bile and saliva, and found a writhing cluster of insects, mostly weevils and bark lice. "Morgan?" Jason asked. He'd been watching from the doorway. He covered his mouth from the smell of the halved sphere and the insects inside it, then attempted to squash it under his boots. I wouldn't let him. I closed the halves and massaged the sage and mistletoe until the sphere was whole again. "It's a gift from him," I said, holding the pulsating ball in my hand. It's our first decoration. Several seconds passed before Jason realized what this meant. We'll be needing more decorations then, he finally replied. Better get into the basement, I said. There would be 3 days of midnight sun, a time to feast and prepare. After, there'd be polar nights until the ritual was over. The midnight sun was peaceful, though, and it kept our blue-eyed visitors away. As the bark sprouted across my skin, the cold bothered me less, which was good, as I spent most of my time outside. This was a feast, after all, and I could no longer eat solid food. I stood outside, naked except for the bark, and drank in the sunlight. Little roots grew from my feet, slacking my thirst via moisture in the soil. And when the wind gusted across the hills, my branches swayed and my pine needles rattled. It would have been pleasant, if not for the sounds coming from the house. Blood-curdling reminders of what horrors awaited us. Jason was still busy with the decorations. The woman in the basement, of course, simply would not stop screaming. Though driven by vengeance, my heart wasn't made of stone. Every wail of anguish that escaped the woman's lips felt like a nail being driven through my body. Truthfully, I don't know how Jason went through with it. Every thump of his machete, every corresponding scream from the woman reminded me just how much my big brother loved me. There is one memory from just before the cops found us. When our father had realized he'd have to flee the law. Again, I don't remember the specifics. Precisely what my father had done to me before he made his hasty getaway. Whatever he'd done, though, he did it in a rush. He wasn't gentle. Jason had begun to reach puberty. Despite our scant nutrition, he was growing larger, more muscular. Once or twice, Jason intervened when our father set his sights on me. Soon our father found that it was easier to keep Jason chained to the wall with a steel collar around his neck. The memory begins with me on that dingy mattress. Jason was sitting, staring at the floor. His neck had turned purple with bruises. While our father had tended to me, Jason fought and struggled against his chains so savagely that he nearly crushed his windpipe against the collar. I'm going to kill that motherfucker, Jason rasped. Then the cops broke through the wall. As the first polar night set in, I struck my pose in the den, across from the fireplace. Though it sounded utterly mundane compared to the other rituals, holding one's pose was of critical importance. My feet ached, especially when more roots sprouted from my toes and soles, inching across the floorboards in a futile search for water and soil. A terrible pain flared in my shoulders, as I wasn't able to rest my arms or lower them to my sides, what with all my new branches. I spoke only when necessary and took immense care not to move my bark-lined lips too much when I did. It's time to hang the ornaments, I told Jason. Outside, the visitors had returned. They were louder now and dared to creep ever closer to the cabin. I fought my growing dread, tooth and nail. Now that I was mostly rooted to the floor, escape was likely impossible. If I gave in to my fear, my mounting panic, and let myself even for one fraction of a second consider blacking out, I knew I'd be unable to recover my willpower. So I stood perfectly still as Jason hung the ornaments. There was a tongue, bright red, the color of poinsettia. There were bits of the woman's scalp with the hair still attached, through which Jason threaded silver tinsel. There were lengths of flayed flesh, wet and dripping, that Jason draped around my branches like garlands. He finished with those, but the ornamentation wasn't done. He still needed to crown my head with a star. She won't survive the last part, Jason said, so we'll have to wait. Then the lights went out. Not just those powered by our generators, but our flashlights as well. Their bulbs suddenly winking out. The heater went soon after. Jason lit a candle. Down in the basement, the woman began to moan again. Jason's watch and cell phone died with the lights, so there was no way to tell how much time had passed. Jason wore extra layers to keep warm as he sat near me with his rifle, a candle burning on the floor between his boots. Every time one of the visitors scratched at the walls or thumped across the roof, he gripped the rifle tighter. My eyes were drawn to the fireplace. There was frost in the firebox, not snow dust from the open flue, but a layer of ice. As I watched it, little frozen tendrils spread wider. "Make the star," I whispered. "He's coming." Though all our electronics had died, somehow the battery for the angle grinder was still at full power. This was a small mercy for the woman in the basement. I suppose as it meant Jason wouldn't have to use a hacksaw. He went to the basement. I heard his muffled voice saying, "Just hold still, it's almost over." When the grinder blade shrieked against bone and the woman screamed. She screamed so loud that it nearly drowned out the wild chittering from the visitors crowding around the cabin. Jason returned with a 7-pointed star built mostly from the woman's ribs. He fashioned it to my head with some string. Jason's hands were still slick with blood, and I noticed he didn't bother locking the trapdoor behind him. He collapsed into his chair. The frost from the mouth of the fireplace had spread farther, creeping now across the floor. Once the star was in place, the visitors quieted down. A bolt of fear shot through me as I knew the final test was going to begin soon. "Jason?" I gasped, right before the visitors kicked in the front door and swarmed inside. My big brother shot up from his chair and aimed his rifle into the dark. Outside the halo of candlelight, I saw little shapes and their bright blue eyes, then muzzle flashes as the room filled with gunshots. Still, I didn't move a muscle, not even when the candle blew out and Jason screamed in pain. The visitors worked feverishly in the dark, grunting and squealing as they went about their wet, messy business. The room was pitch black. It made no difference at all if my eyes were opened or closed. Jason had known this might happen. The text made it clear that while the visitors were unlikely to harm the tree, there was no guaranteeing the safety of anyone else taking part in the ritual. As the visitors pulled him apart, Jason never tried to run. He would never leave my side. Through it all, as always, he remained with me until the end. The visitors finished and left the cabin. Several candles sparked up on their own, placed on the floor in the shape of a 7-pointed star, just like the one Jason fashioned to my head. I'd been in the dark so long the candlelight stung my eyes. The visitors had placed Jason inside the star, or the bits of him that were left. They'd gutted him, then hung his innards around my branches, adding to the ornaments. Using his blood, they left elaborate paintings on the walls, though one stood out more than the others. It was a painting of Jason and me, holding hands with our father looming behind us in the background, and I remained perfectly still. The polar nights remained silent. Not even the visitors made a peep outside, and the ice frosting in the fireplace spread across the room like cancer cells, metastasizing in a smoker's lung. Then the winter took a deep breath and exhaled. The ice that had overtaken the room hardened into something like permafrost. Since my transformation, the cold hadn't bothered me much, but now I felt it gnawing at me. A dusting of ice crystals gusted from the firebox, then danced before me like broken glass shards caught in the wind. Though I'd been still for days, this was the critical moment. Any movement, however slight, would anger him, for Father Christmas was quite stern. I didn't want to think about what punishments might await me if this humble tree displeased him. The ice crystal spun and danced, then coalesced into the ghostly shape on his face, angular and nearly skeletal, with a white beard of snow jutting sharply from his chin. The ice of his face was so immaculate and flawless that when I looked into his eyes, I saw my dreadful reflection. He spoke. I didn't understand his rough, ancient tongue, a language even older than the Proto-Norse from the texts I suspected, but I grasped the meaning of it. "I want to know where my father is hiding," I said. He studied me. He inspected the ornaments upon my branches. He even brushed against me. The chill of his touch was unearthly. It was the cold one must have felt naked in space. The cold that resides in the frozen bellies of glaciers. The cold of a dead universe that has never known so much as a flicker of starlight. Father Christmas nodded. This humble tree had pleased him. "Your gift?" he said, and his voice was the sound of tectonic plates scraping against one another, and the icy ghost before me blew away like loose snow in a wind gust. The polar night retreated. The sun returned vindictively, setting the world aflame, and I screamed as the morning fire turned my branches to cinders, as it burned the bark from my naked flesh and reduced the ornaments to ash. I tumbled to the floor, fully human once more. The 7-pointed star atop my head shattered. On my hands and knees, I noticed a small red gift box sitting beside Jason's remains. The box was tied shut with a ribbon woven from gold and silver. It came apart with the gentlest tug. I pulled the lid of the box. There was a single piece of paper inside. Upon the paper there was an address. Our father's address. It was time to go claim my gift.